Ben, if you, at that point, maybe you can kick the meeting off for us if it's necessary.
Sounds good.
Here we go.
Hi there. Sorry I'm late.
I think we're ready when you are, Ken.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'd like to ask Mr. Freed to call roll.
Commissioner Del Rosario.
Present.
Commissioner Graham.
Here.
Commissioner Javando.
Present.
Vice Chair Fong.
Present.
Chair McCroskey.
Here last. Moving right along. Right. So our first item of business is the public comment. This is a time for people to make comments on things that are not otherwise on the agenda. And I will note that this is also the time to make comments for future agenda items from the public. Are there any, and you would request using the raise your hand feature in the Zoom application.
Chair McCroskey, I see two hands raised. Start with Amy Smolins. Please go ahead, Amy.
Muted. Hi. Today I was riding home and saw the workers at the dug up section of Washington from Masonic to Key Route. Yay. Washington signed Bicycle Boulevard and one of Albany's primary bike routes, including to schools, and crosses the Albany Greenway. And it's been literally the worst stretch of road in Albany for years, full of potholes and trenches. We've been reporting it since at least 2016. And I spoke to a worker there and he said the first layer is going down tomorrow and it will be finished Monday. So thank you to whoever on staff finally got that done. Yay, yay. Everyone's looking forward to a safe and comfortable ride on the Washington Avenue Bicycle Boulevard. So thank you. And that's it.
Great. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Next up, Jeremiah, please go ahead.
Thank you, Jeff Bond. This is public comment good for the city, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So, you know, I was on planning and zoning the other night, but it's not their jurisdiction. I was on the 2x2 meeting last month or something. And I want to raise awareness. I believe I raised awareness about this last time during this meeting. The intersection, I'm bringing up Google Maps on my phone right now. The intersection of, I believe, Monroe, right there in the Sprouts Banfield Pet Hospital area, right there on Monroe and I believe 10th, maybe 10th Street. I'm suggesting a four-way stop because the university wants to build housing and AC Transit buses drive so fast. And right in front of Banfield Pet Hospital, you can go all the way from San Pablo all the way to down in the university area. And I'm wondering, it's about 1,000 feet. I'm looking at Google Maps and it's about 1,000 feet. And you can get up some speed right there. So I don't know if anybody's driven by there, but I just suggest a four-way stop right there, Monroe and 10th, for safety. We got a lot of kids. We got people walking in the grocery store. We're encouraging walking and biking the community. So I guess this is the best place to talk about it because this is the area for the city to do something, planning and zoning, or traffic and safety. I mean, so that's about it. Also, one more thing I'd like to point out is that AC Transits drive way too fast up and down Solano. I mean, way too fast. Is it possible someone can make a phone call to AC Transit and say, please drive slower in Albany by our schools and our businesses and our post office and our people? I'm looking at an AC Transit bus right now that just drove down real fast. That's why I said something, because it just reminded me. You know, when this pandemic came out, it took a while, maybe a couple months ago, we finally had some 15-mile-an-hour signs on Solano. I don't know where those went, but there's still no speed limit signs on Solano. I'm on Solano right now. I'm on Solano and Talbot at the free laundry program, volunteering. So I don't see 1 mile-an-hour sign. What's the speed limit on Solano? I don't know. There's no sign that says anything. So I just suggest, positive suggestion, put a sign so that way cars know what to do. Also, if we can get something about Gordo's crosswalk up there, maybe a sign, a pedestrian sign, some sort of thing around Gordo's. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Any further public comment?
I don't see any, Chairman Crossing.
All right, then let's return it to our agenda. The next item is our consent calendar. Does anybody need to pull the draft minutes from the consent calendar?
We have one presentation first, Chairman Crossing.
Oh, I'm sorry. My bad. Right. The monthly police data on collisions and citations. Thank you.
So this is reporting for the month of March. There were 0 pedestrian collisions reported. 1 bicycle collision was reported. There were 10 vehicle collisions, 1 of which was an injury collision. There were 12 moving citations issued and 0 DUI arrests. And there was a request last month to report a little more information on bike and head collisions. The February 2 pedestrian collisions both involved right turning vehicles. One was at San Pablo and Monroe, where the vehicle was turning right off of Monroe onto San Pablo. And a pedestrian was in the crosswalk crossing Monroe. The second was a pedestrian walking on Buchanan, crossing Pierce Street, the north crosswalk, and a vehicle was making the right turn off of Pierce onto Buchanan. And the March bicycle collision was a westbound vehicle and westbound cyclist on Marin, and the vehicle was making a right turn onto Carmel and clipped the bicycle with the right turn movement. That concludes my report.
All right, thank you. Any questions from commissioners? Seeing none, let's check for public comment.
Any members of the public wish to comment on this, please use the raise your hand function. Okay, Mr. Chair, we do have one member who wishes to speak. Amy, please go ahead.
Thanks. So in the situation where the westbound car right hooked the cyclist with the right of way, was the driver cited? or somebody?
I think we'll take, we'll answer any questions after your comment
Okay,
period, since
okay.
you have your full time.
All right, well, let me just, and one more thing, I guess, with the Pier Street, it would seem to make sense then, since the, let's see, the driver was turned right across from Pier Street onto Buchanan and hit the person in the crosswalk, that at some point, when the pedestrian cyclist light is green, there should be a no right turn signal for the drivers. That would seem to be something that would help safety of the pedestrians and cyclists there. Thank you. I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other public comments?
I'm not seeing any, Chair McCloskey.
Great. Mr. Freed, do you have an answer to Amy's question?
I don't know if a moving citation was issued or any citation for the March collision.
Could you follow that up on that for us?
I can ask, yes.
That would be great. Commissioner comments, opinions.
I guess
Yeah,
a comment would be that it would be great to have the answer to the citation question on just as a future reporting action for any of the collisions, if that information is easily available.
I don't know.
I think we could broaden that out just slightly. I mean, I think we have an interest in any, bike, pedestrian, and vehicle involved crashes, and are likely to ask questions, including if there have been citations. So I think staff can expect those questions and hopefully come prepared if the information is available. Other comments, opinions? It's a hard fact that motorists are not paying as much attention to crosswalks on their blind side when they're turning right. That doesn't mean that pedestrians should abandon the streets. So hopefully we can find ways to make these less common. So let's keep that in mind. Without further comment, we'll move on to the next item, which at this time is in fact, thank you, the consent calendar with its singular item of the minutes from our last meeting. Are there any corrections from the commission? I guess we need to check to see if there's any public comment.
I'm not seeing any raised hands.
Then let's bring it back to the commission. And can I get a motion to approve the minutes? Unless there's further discussion.
I'll move approval of the minutes and the consent calendar.
Del Rosario moves.
Second.
Javandel seconds. All in favor? Or do we have to do a roll call?
I believe we do. Commissioner Del Rosario,
Aye.
Commissioner Graham,
Aye.
Commissioner Javandel,
Aye.
Vice Chair Fong,
Aye.
Chair McCroskey.
Aye. All right. Consent calendar consisting of the minutes of our last meeting passes. That moves us on to our next item, number 5.1, the Marin Ave Rehabilitation Project. Staff?
I'll kick this off, Chair McCroskey. I'd like to start by introducing Ernest Clark. He's on his way up to being on the Zoom panel here. Ernest is an engineer with Zune Engineering. As you know, we utilize consultants from time to time to serve as a function, essentially as an extension of staff when we get shorthanded. Normally, Mark Hurley would be here this evening. He is recovering from a medical procedure and probably at home watching. As for a variety of reasons, and as you know, Robert Gonzalez, our CIP manager, recently left the city to go to Mountain View. So Ernest is helping out on a number of things, including this project on Marin Avenue and among other things, Washington Avenue as well. But for this evening's meeting, we'll be talking about Marin Avenue. And so I think if I understand the sequence here, we're going to turn it over to Ernest, and then Justin can jump in at various stages depending on the nature of your questions. So thank you, and Ernest, welcome. Thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you, Jeff. Everyone hear me okay?
Sounds good.
Good. So yeah, thank you, Jeff. I also want to thank Albany staff and Chair McCroskey, members of the commission. Thank you for the opportunity to speak about the Marin Avenue Rehabilitation Project this evening. A little bit about myself. I come from 20 years with the County Marin as a project engineer and a previous assistant director there. I moved to Zune Engineering about a year ago and was fortunate enough to land this opportunity to help out with some Albany projects. So I have some significant public project experience, and I think the presentation before you will be a good representation of the improvements we're trying to make here on Marin Avenue. Let me see if I can't get this presentation going for you. Can everyone see this slideshow?
Yes.
All right. Okay, and my apologies in advance if I'm switching. I have two screens, and the video window sometimes get in the way of the presentation. So if I need to shift my viewpoint, I apologize for that. Anyway, this is the 2021 Street Rehabilitation Program, Marin Avenue Rehabilitation Project. I was brought in several months ago to manage this project in coordination with CSG consultants. We should have Lawrence Lau and David Cito in the audience if there's any technical questions on some of the project elements or the design approach. And again, I want to thank Albany staff for their assistance in moving this project along through the various meetings and concept drawings that we've been working on for the past several months. So tonight, we'd like to cover the project limits and goals. We'd also like to focus in a little bit on the Albany Active Transportation Plan Project 14 for Marin Avenue, and identify elements in Project 14 that are included in this project, elements that have already been implemented or are in the implementation process, and elements that we're not including for various reasons. Following Project 14 guidelines and Albany standards, we developed some design guidelines for CSG consultants to use. And so we want to talk about those a little bit and how we came to the project concept. And then we want to do a deeper dive into the project elements, the lane configurations we're proposing for Marin Avenue, the intersection design approach, the bulb out design criteria, and then we'll do a deeper dive starting on the west end of the project and moving east at the Talbot intersection, and then focusing on the Masonic to Key route and highlighting the green infrastructure. Real quick on that one, I'll spend some additional time talking on that slide. It's probably not fully accurately representative of the Masonic Intersection project that you saw several weeks ago. I believe Albany staff, Allison, gave a presentation on that. And that project was recently sort of dissected to grab elements of it and include in the Marin Avenue project. So as it stands, the Masonic project now is going to be a standalone kind of signal project, and the Marin Avenue project will take the civil improvements to that end. The slide that you're seeing may not reflect all the final striping because that integration isn't fully done. But I'll speak to that a little bit more when we get to the Masonic slide. And then we'll move on to the Ordway Street and Ventura Ave improvements. Those kind of three intersections are really funky as the road takes a turn and heads up into the city of Berkeley. And then we'll look briefly at the Albany Library on-street ADA parking. The code requires that we do an ADA parking spot on the street there, and it needs to be compliant with current standards. And so that's just a little bit bigger than what exists there, which is just a curb ramp with some blue curb. And then I'll close with a brief discussion on the project estimate and a rough timeline and open it to questions. So looking at the project limits and goals, we're starting at the Cornell intersection, actually just east of the Cornell intersection, because that was recently improved. We want to preserve those improvements, keep those. And we'll move up to the Berkeley city limit. Project is about 3/4 of a mile. It includes 14 intersections and almost 60 curb ramps currently in the project scope. The main goals are to rehabilitate the pavement, to improve pedestrian safety and access, maintain the existing paths of travel, and make sure they're ADA compliant. We did look at adding pedestrian paths of travel and crosswalks, and that triggers a lot of cost and potentially a lot of drainage improvements. So cost was a consideration when looking at changing crosswalk locations and or adding them. We want to improve the drainage and install new facilities if needed. You can walk this Marin Avenue and see old drainage grates, cast iron things that just don't work very well anymore. And then obviously with a paving project, you're going to get refresh striping and improved signage. So let's talk briefly about the Albany Active Transportation Plan. I have a little snippet of the plan here, but you should have also received in your packet a copy of the actual plan excerpt. Some goals have already been achieved that were identified in this plan: the Santa Fe Safe Routes to School project and the Masonic Intersection Improvements project that Allison presented several weeks ago. Some goals in Project 14 need further study. This roundabout at Ramona and the median islands at the Cornell Talbot intersection and those various areas. When reaching out to fire safety, we found that those may kind of preclude emergency access during times of traffic down there. And so for this project, we didn't want to undertake that at this time. And then all other goals from the Project 14 will be incorporated. And so we're happy to report that and kind of highlight those. So this is a kind of a brief snippet of the original concept. The concept has been refined, and from that refinement process, we've got some exhibits for you in the following upcoming slides. But in general, the Project 14 project scope, all elements of Project 14 identified in that active transportation plan for Albany, were used to develop some design guidelines. And we worked extensively with CSG. We gave them copies of Albany's resource documents, including the ATP, and asked them to incorporate everything into the design. That includes ADA compliance, reducing the curve radii around curves to slow vehicles down as they go to make turning movements onto the narrow side streets. The Ordway Crossing was identified as needing some improvements. And then another major goal was to shorten the pedestrian crossings by minimizing the north-south crosswalks to reduce costs and increase safety, and then place bulb outs to shorten those crossings. Marin Avenue is pretty wide at 60 feet for the traveled way, and you want to narrow those crossings if you can to decrease the amount of time it takes pedestrians to cross, but also create a bulb out and a little safe haven for pedestrians to be more visible as they go to use the crosswalk. And then in rehabilitating the roadway, obviously you're going to get a new surface and repair failures. There's an opportunity to improve drainage and any ponding and puddles that occur during heavy rains. You get refresh striping and signage, and we will coordinate advanced utility work and looking to minimize costs and maximize value. We're looking at reasonable paving strategies, nothing too fancy. The initial design had some very deep pavement rehabilitation recommendations that were really escalating the project costs. And so we're looking at doing something that's long lasting, but that addresses all the failures in the roadway. And then we're looking at crosswalk relocations where we can to minimize the drainage improvements. As you introduce these bulb outs in these flatter areas, you're lengthening the curb and not necessarily getting the ability to deal with that in terms of elevation. And so you don't want to create these bird baths or ponds behind these bulb outs. And so where we do, we try to consider that when designing the bulb outs. So here's a cross section of the existing road versus the proposed new lane configuration. As you can see, we're taking 2 feet away from the median turn lane. We're taking a foot away from the parking, and we're maintaining this 5-foot bike lane and also providing a 2-foot buffer between parked cars and the 5-foot bike lane. I'm aware of some public comment that we've recently received about flipping these, and I'd be happy to address that a little bit now. I do appreciate that it can offer an opportunity to create a safe haven between the curb gutter and a parked car, allowing cyclists to be in this more or less protected area. I think that those, and I of course will defer to Albany City staff if they want to chime in and have different ideas, and definitely take the commission's recommendations on looking at this further. But this small, relatively short section of roadway has 14 intersections, and that means approximately every 300 feet, a cyclist is having to traverse an incoming street. And so I think that this, I think it's called Copenhagen design or protected bike lane designs. They work really well where you have long corridors, controlled intersections with stoplights, and the ability to really get a long section where that cyclist can be protected with 14 different crossings, and the impacts to the sight distance of the intersecting streets as cars come up to the stop signs on the cross streets and look to make turning movements onto Marin. They have to sometimes creep out, and in doing that, they would tend to block that protected lane, and cyclists would definitely have to stop if that were to happen. And so I think that this just needs a closer look. It's I don't know that the Marin project is the project to look at that. So I will just leave it at that and go ahead and wait for the discussion on this as we go. The intersection design approach, we'll go over some typical treatments here. So hopefully you can see my cursor. We'll start with condition A. And so that's to reduce the curb return radius. And what that means is this black line is the existing curb, and this red line is the proposed new curb. And so that tighter curb radius really makes vehicles slow down as they have to come and navigate this turn and turn onto Pomona. And that definitely slows down vehicle speed when you do that. Installing bulb outs for Marin Avenue crosswalk. So again, we're looking at a 4-foot bulb out to not get into this buffer area and to shorten the crossing as much as possible so that it's safer for pedestrians to get across. We want to provide directional curb ramps. And I am aware that there has been significant discussion in Albany about directional curb ramps, and we understand that this is the preferred configuration with these various radii shown. And so we want to do that with this project for the almost 60 curb ramps that we're doing. One thing I do want to discuss a little bit is the issue of 4-way crossing in this area of Marin. So when you're in downtown and you're in a very busy area along Marin or Solano, it makes a lot of sense to have 4 crossings. You have the area to do it. Cars are generally traveling slower, and there are a lot of people coming and going in all directions when you're in the downtown area. Primarily, you have east-west travel here on Marin. You do obviously have north-south crossings, but the goal of this project was just to maintain those existing crossings. When conceptualizing this project, we did explore adding 4-way intersections at all intersections, and that was triggered by an ADA discussion. And so when we did consider that, we found that if you're up in the rural part of Marin, introducing another crossing at each intersection tended to to add, 8 or 10 crossings where you have equivalent facilitation by having one. Now, we're not trying to limit pedestrian freedom by doing this, but we're really trying to control where pedestrians in an intersection where you have higher vehicle speeds and you don't have stop control or signal control. You really want to have one crossing that's highlighted so that vehicles really are paying attention to where that is. So that was our approach for that. And looking at that, the other element that came up was this condition highlighted by D. So if we can just talk about this briefly, pedestrians are going east-west along Marin, and they have not a formal crosswalk, but they have a directional ramp for ADA. Pedestrians are crossing here at Pomona. And we thought because of ADA that we were required to put an additional crosswalk here. And if you do, you obviously build a curb ramp, that added cost and the safety considerations that I mentioned. But if you don't put it, what are you required to put there? So we hired an ADA expert and they weighed in with a technical memorandum. You may have seen signs like this: crosswalk closed or no pedestrian access, all along the freeway where you have sidewalks that end at a freeway on-ramp. We originally thought that this was something that we had to do. So our ADA access expert reached out to the Federal Access Board and formally asked the question, are you required to put in this barrier? And the response we got was no, as long as you have some other barrier to access. And in considering aesthetics and keeping with the aesthetics of Albany, we settled on some heavy planting. And so that's this note D, using heavy planting or other hardscape, not pedestrian barriers where no marked crosswalks are present. Under ADA, there's an implied crossing here. And so we want to prohibit that and keep people traveling in the one crossing in this rural area along Marin. Moving on to condition E, the 444 crosswalk will be standard across the project and we'll have green bike lane markings across each intersection. And we also have a 2-foot continuous bike lane buffer striping. So what did we look at when we looked at the bulb out design criteria? We wanted to maintain the curb radius to 15-foot minimum. And this is for our public safety vehicles to get around. We want to maintain the side street width. We don't want to bulb out into these narrower side streets because that would really create a tight space for vehicles to pass. And so we want to maintain the minimum lane widths here onto intersecting side streets so that turns can be made safely when vehicles are at the stop sign. We also had a radius of 20 and 10 curb transitions. And so that's a softer radius as you get into the curb and then a tighter radius here as it forms a straight point. We did look at the Albany 44-foot fire truck, the SU-30 delivery truck, and some semi-trailer trucks for different conditions along the project lengths. And then we also looked to minimize impacts at the pavement conform and the drainage systems. So starting at the Talbot intersection, this is again the western project limit like I talked about. We want to preserve these improvements that were made at Cornell. We have typical bulb out here. We have 444 crosswalks at all the locations. We have the green bike lane marking, and this of course represents the paving conform. So like I mentioned, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about this Masonic intersection. The 444 striping has been added, but all of the other striping elements that you saw for the Masonic project that Allison presented have not been fully incorporated into this concept. I can tell you that all of the ADA ramps as designed and the striping as presented will be implemented as part of this project. It's just not currently reflected on this concept level exhibit. And so my apologies for that. It's just going to take some time to fold that in. The projects will be well coordinated. And so even though the Masonic intersection project is going to be improving streetlights and not the civil improvements, we want to coordinate the construction of those two projects so that they overlap and dovetail as closely as possible. And so with that, there may be a brief period, we're hoping less than a month, where we have some temporary striping that doesn't reflect the final configuration as the new signals are operational, to enable the signals to go in first and allow us to affect the civil improvements later. Alternatively, if there's an opportunity to do the reverse and that starts to make sense as these projects come to final design and fruition, we will definitely explore those opportunities. Again, keeping with our bulb outs, Masonic is a little bit of an oddball in that we are bulbing out in both directions. It has the width to do it, and so where we have the width to do it, and it adds that safety element, and we want to go ahead and do that. Again, 444s and the green bike lane striping. We want to just highlight this as not finalized. We're really excited to get some feedback from commission members and members of the public about these two opportunities here. We're aware that the Masonic intersection resignalization, protected left turn pocket, through movements, and right turning cars may start to cause some congestion here and lead to potential backups. And so we are carefully considering bike refuge areas, including a protected zone here at the front for bikes and with striping to direct bikes to wait here to go left onto Masonic. The other option is to have cyclists waiting in this refuge area with some signage telling them this is where you should wait until Masonic turns green so that you can enter the crosswalk here and responsibly cross with your bicycle. So these are kind of some options that we're looking at. Another option is potentially a 10-foot right turn lane protected lane for vehicles. And so that would be, we have the available width to do that here, and we can even narrow this bulb out by a foot or two to make sure we have that width. But that is another option if we get enough feedback that is the preferred configuration. And again, work will be coordinated with Masonic signal improvements for the Marin Avenue project. Again, any phasing necessary or any coordination between the separate contracts will be folded in as we further develop this design. And then we want to hide, this is an element kind of brought up in Project 14, was to remove the parking on both sides. And we thought that due to drainage, the way that everything's sloping, that the green infrastructure and removal of parking in this area was the best choice. And so that's what we looked at adding here with note F. Moving on up to the Ordway Crossing and the Ventura Crossing. So again, these black lines represent the existing curbs, and these new improvements obviously represent a tightening of the curb radius where we can to slow vehicles down. We're looking at decreasing this crossing with a bulb out and highlighting this with the nice 444 crosswalk. The bike lane striping is continuous throughout the project, and this Ventura Ave crossing really is at a weird angle. And so we've looked at squaring that up and adding a rectangular rapid flashing beacon to highlight pedestrians using that crossing. And so we feel like that's a very good improvement there at the Ventura Crossing. And lastly, this is the library entrance ADA parking. This will trigger some changes. The standard ADA parking space includes a space for a vehicle to pull out of the roadway, and includes this offloading zone, I guess you want to call it, and a curb ramp that goes up onto the sidewalk. Fortunately, you have sufficient sidewalk width here. It does require the removal of this tree, and we want to just highlight the location of the bike racks as cyclists that to access this, they will be having to make this sort of weird movement or mount the curb. And so we're looking at other opportunities to make that a little bit more user-friendly for cyclists with potentially a rolled curb at this location. And so a quick budget overview. This is the preliminary engineer's estimate that we received from CSG. You can see it's about 3.7 million with a 10% contingency up to 4.1 million. That's roughly $1.5 million in pedestrian ADA costs, $2 million in roadway related costs, and $600,000 in drainage and incidentals. 4.1 million total cost estimate. We're looking at the analyzing the CIP budget impacts. This Albany has roughly 2 million per year that they're looking at spending on road rehabilitation. This eats up a considerable number of years on that. So again, we're very excited to get your feedback tonight. Once we do get your feedback, we'll be entering detailed design work. We'll come back to your commission with a final recommendation on the final project. We hope to bid this project in the fall of 2021 and construct it in the winter of 2021 through the spring of 2022. And with that, I'm happy to open it to questions.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Commissioner, questions? I saw Commissioner Fong first.
Yeah, I've got a quick question about, you mentioned the looking into a roundabout on Ramona. I was just curious if you can provide more context about where that is, and you know, are there any plans around that, and just if there's any update around that, and how Ramona was chosen. Maybe that was from direction from the staff. I don't know. I'm sorry, but I just wanted to get more context about that, the roundabout idea.
Yeah, so we're actually not considering the roundabout at Ramona as part of this project. My direction was to look at ADA improvements, bicycle improvements, the reduced curb radii, and the general road rehabilitation elements of the project. We folded in as many elements as we could from Project 14, and we feel like we're meeting all of them with the exception of the roundabout at Ramona. I think that takes additional further study, and it's just not something that I was directed to undertake at this time. And so that will not be included in the project.
I see.
Just to be clear, that was something that was in the ATP.
It was. That's an element of the ATP that is not being included as part of the project.
And you know, that was never fully studied or fleshed out as a plan. So there are often things from the ATP that don't come to fruition in quite the same way. So it's not terribly surprising.
Got it. Okay, good to know.
Commissioner Del Rosario.
Thanks. Two questions. One, with the bike lane buffer, did you think about the trade-offs between having the buffer on the parking side as opposed to on the street side, on the travel lane side?
We didn't have a lot of discussion about that. We typically, where you have vehicles parked, you want that buffer against vehicles to avoid being doored, I think it's called, where someone opens a door. For arterial roads that I've designed in the past where you have no parking, it's typical for me to see that buffer as you're talking about between the traveling cars on the roadway and the bike lane. So we did not, we talked about that briefly, but did not go that direction with this because of the extensive parking along the corridor.
Okay. And then second question is, do we have an estimate of what the cost would be if we did include the 8 additional crosswalks as you go further up Marin to have 4-legged crosswalks?
We spoke about that briefly, and we don't have a good idea. Numbers like 25,000 to 50,000 per crossing were thrown out. And so it was a significant project impact when we did consider those. That's as far as we took it. When we heard that, it was kind of like, let's just keep one crossing, feel safer to us as engineers, and move forward.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Grant.
I have a couple questions. So related to Commissioner Del Rosario's comment, I found, and maybe this is because I'm not familiar with the ATP project, but it's unclear to me that you skipped a number of intersections, and so are there just no improvements scheduled for some of those intersections? Such as, go ahead.
No, I'm happy to address that. We looked at zeroing in on every single intersection and decided against that. To be clear, every single intersection is being upgraded with the guidelines and the design criteria that I presented for a typical intersection.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, each intersection is getting done, and there's almost 60 curb ramps
Great.
related to that.
And so like for the Pomona example that you showed with the bulb outs, that would be the similar treatment that happens like up Ramona and all the way. Okay,
Correct.
great. That wasn't super clear when I was looking at the presentation. Then a couple of other things, like on the Pomona example specifically, you changed the location from the east side to the west side for the crosswalk. Why? Just wondering.
That was the only one that we looked at changing from one side to the other. We obviously changed the alignment up at Ventura a little bit as well, but that was mainly around the drainage considerations. And it saved us a little bit of money to move that crosswalk over, and it seemed to still provide the minimum one crossing. But yes, users that travel that crosswalk often will experience a little bit of a change there and have to adjust. But it's mainly for drainage considerations, as the bulb outs on the east side would have triggered extensive drainage infrastructure going in. And so that's why we chose that.
Okay. And then what is the difference between heavy landscaping and then green infrastructure? So I guess I'm wondering, when you're talking about the heavy landscaping in like the Pomona example, what is there? Are you using it for stormwater purposes, or are we just talking about sort of like hardy big plants that people can't trek through?
At this point, we will return to you with the actual recommendation for hardy landscaping. In talking with city staff, we had some concerns with something that might not be robust enough to, really preclude people from wanting to cross there. You can't stop people from crossing; they'll tromp through the bushes. But we want to make our best effort in terms of the Federal Access Board's recommendations. We also don't want something that maybe is temporary or can be torn out in the future by years from now, when this stuff was supposed to go in for ADA purposes, and then city maintenance staff just goes, oh, this is dying or something, and tears it out. So we still are finalizing what that is, but it is much different than green infrastructure. The green infrastructure down at the Masonic Intersection is a deepened permeable basin to catch water and runoff. Mm-hmm. And it's a way to improve water quality and reduce the loading on your stormwater system. And so the green infrastructure is only proposed at the one location. On the sidewalks, I guess we didn't consider, we talked briefly about green infrastructure at those locations, but again, we're looking at so many curb ramps and such a large project estimate at this point. Anywhere where it added cost, we kind of tended to veer away from those. So we didn't consider green infrastructure at all those locations.
Okay. And then, sorry, one more. Actually, no. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Other commissioner questions? Before we move to public comment, I have one. And this is something you may not have considered and is a little bit out of left field, but in the sense that everything long-term is in play. Of the improvements that have been identified so far in this plan, if we were to switch, and I understand this is not an easy proposal, if we were to switch from having our designated truck route on Solano to having the designated truck route be Marin, and I understand that the pavement is not designed to withstand that in this plan. If we were to make that kind of switch in the future, are there any features in this plan that would have to be removed to make that possible?
Off the cuff and out of left field, thank you, Chair. Most likely, you're going to want to look at all the curb radii. You're going to want to look at routes into downtown businesses and the impacts to those side streets. We did briefly discuss this, and I was given direction to not consider this because of the extensive study and the delays it would cause in implementing all these other improvements. And so additionally, the paving section would need to be thickened up. Right now,
Yes.
we're settling on like 4 inches, and the 8-inch and 18-inch pavement sections that we were originally talking about are really ballooning up this project cost estimate. So I think the minimum recommended for what it is at this point is the 4 inches. But if we were going to look at a truck route, we would really want to beef that up.
Yeah,
And look
I'm
at change.
not asking that. That's pretty clear to me. So you're saying that even though you've taken into account turning radiuses of emergency vehicles and semi-trailers, that may not be sufficient in the future if this were to be investigated as a truck route.
Correct. We would want to study that more before I give you that answer.
Fair enough. Fair enough. It's out of left field, just a flyer. And thank you for answering that and entertaining that. Commissioner Javadal.
Just a question kind of linked to that. If you were looking at the possibility of it being a truck route, did you look at the structural capacity of the box culvert under the middle of the road?
We didn't, and again, we talked briefly about the truck route. We didn't do any engineering analysis, and that was my response to the chair. I'm not concerned about the structural integrity of the culvert in the middle. It's fairly deep, and I believe it's made out of reinforced concrete pipe. So because it's so deep and it is RCP, I'm not concerned with the structural integrity of that. The shallower drainage systems, potentially, more importantly, utilities. And so there'd be some significant utility coordination that we would want to do. We're doing regular utility coordination, but with a 4-inch grind and overlay, typically utilities are much deeper than 4 inches and the temporary impacts aren't much. But if we're doing a thicker pavement section for a truck route and they have any planned utility projects or shallow utilities, we would want to definitely address those. Those are of concern, more so than the drainage system. But thank you.
Thanks.
Let me just state to be clear that I am in no way proposing to make Marin a truck route under this project. I'm just wondering about future possibilities. So that's also to the public. No need to respond to my intention because I have no intention of proposing Marin as a truck route at this time. Thank you for entertaining those flyers. Are there any further questions from the commission? Then let's go ahead and turn it over to public comment. And as before, use the raise your hand feature. Mr. Vaughn, please.
Yes, we have, looks like we have so far 3 public speakers. We'll start with John Mickey. Please go ahead.
Good evening, commissioners. Ernst, I really appreciate your presentation. I think I came into this pretty cold, so I looked at the plans briefly tonight and sent some comments in. So I really appreciate understanding that you all looked at 4-way crosswalks. And so I think some of my comments are probably more directed at staff and the commission and conversations about long-term implementation. Maybe I'll just ask a couple questions, then wait for responses afterwards. But I guess one question for staff would be, in terms of funding, it sounds like this is not the same funding source that funded the Buchanan and Lower Marin work that was done. But I would like to note that Lower Marin, I think probably because it was a different funding source, actually has crosswalks on all 4 sides. And so any work that's done here as proposed would be dramatically different than what's below on Lower Marin. So let's see, that's different funding. I think I do have some, so I guess then my statement to staff and more to the commission and eventually to council would be more, I understand that the 4-way crosswalks would cost more. I understand there's more engineering, but if we're thinking that this is something that is going to be with us for the next 30 or 50 years, are we better off having more phases implemented over more years and actually get all 4 crosswalks, as opposed to planting that may or may not stay in place that would prevent someone from trying to cross where there's not officially a crosswalk? let's see. I think in my notes that I sent to the commission, I was in support of looking at the idea of having protected bike lanes. I think I appreciate, Ernst, all of your comments because I think I can understand where you're coming from. I think the other thing that I'm realizing as I got to look on Google Earth a little more is I realized right dab middle of this project at Santa Fe and at Curtis, there are brand new bulb outs that would have to be torn out in order to accommodate a protected bike lane, or we'd have to be thinking about ramping bicyclists up onto that bulb out and then back off of that bulb out. So I'm not saying not that it shouldn't be looked at or impossible. I'm just saying it is definitely going to need a lot more study. And I do appreciate you starting off by talking a little bit about the background and explaining the kind of sandbox you were given to work in. So I do appreciate all the work that you've done. With that, I'll go ahead and stop my comments.
You're on mute, Jeff.
Sorry, thank you. Amy, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the presentation. I was wondering if there was a budgetary concern, whether you would consider some streets not having the bulb out and making sure there is a four-way crosswalk. I happen to live on Marin and Ordway, and I've been here for 20 years. We have an aging population on Ordway. We have a robust walking community, both children who go to Marin School and also many of my neighbors who are elderly. And I feel like if we didn't offer the four-way crosswalk, it would make it harder mobility-wise for those who can walk to get across. Sometimes, when you go shopping and you just need to go on that one side to get to Safeway, or you just need to go to 7-Eleven. And with the speed of Marin being what it is, that is really a safety concern. And I'm wondering if some of that would be taken into consideration. Just the speed in which cars come down Marin, not having that extra crosswalk, I feel, might make it a little confusing for drivers, and they might, accelerate past. And so that's something I would like the plan to take into consideration. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Next speaker, Dan Johnson, please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking public comment. I missed the beginning of the presentation, so I apologize for that. I submitted a lengthy letter earlier today with some illustrations and some photos in it. And I hope people can take the time to look at that. I have so many comments. I don't want to try to recap. I'll try to stay general, but there's some things in the presentation I did hear that caught my attention. Basically, this funding and this design cycle has got to get us to the street, to the right of way that will carry Albany for the next 20 years, right? And we have plans in place, climate action plan, complete streets plan. The city council voted to cut gasoline consumption by 70%, 70%. And active transportation, reducing vehicle miles traveled are the key aspects for doing that. With that background, I don't see any of that happening here. Maybe the problem was framed in the wrong way for the designers. But so I live a block off Marin. I've walked kids to school for 6 years on Marin. We walk to the library. We bike the kids to the Ocean View Park. I feel like this is being looked at as an engineering problem, not from the perspective of someone who's using the right of way to get through. So things like erecting, we're literally talking about erecting barriers to people walking, right? So you're coming to my neighborhood and putting up a barrier to keep me from crossing the street. How is this in any way what I'd like to see is let's facilitate pedestrians walking, right, crossing. So I'm trying to get to my next point here. I think we talked about cost as barrier. We talked about drainage. We also talked about protected bike lanes coming through intersections being a design challenge. I think those are all challenges because we're thinking of these bulb outs in terms of big concrete blocks, making them all out of concrete, right? Go to Oakland, just go to Oakland, go to Seattle. Think in terms of bollards and paint. When you think in terms of bollards and paint, it's cheap. The bike lanes can fly right through that intersection. You don't have to choose between crosswalk on one side or on the other. Just do them both. And it's flexible and you can change it over time. You can evolve it. I have 35 seconds left. A bike lane that's just a stripe is almost literally worthless as any kind of facilitating biking for people of all ages. Look at the NACTO guidelines. That is an insufficient facility for this street. There's a lot more in my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you for consideration. You can do this. I believe it. Thanks.
Next is Ian McLeod. Please go ahead.
Hi, good evening, commissioners and staff and consultants. I have to say, I'm really disappointed with this plan, and I just think it lacks vision. I think it lacks leadership. I think it lacks long-term planning. In light of the fact that we haven't done an active transportation and a bicycle master plan in almost 10 years, I think this should just be put on hold until that's done again. What we have in our active transportation plan and bicycle plan is way outdated. It should be updated. It should be brought into these modern standards of protected bike lanes. This is worldwide what's happening. We're reducing conflict between bicyclists and cars. I see this through a complete streets lens. There's nothing about complete streets here that includes bicycles. It's still a dangerous cycling facility with cyclists being right next to speeding cars. It's a high volume street. Would you allow your 8-year-old child to bike to Marin School on Marin Avenue? I've been volunteering as a sustainability advisor for Marin School, and we've succeeded in getting a lot of protected bike parking spaces, bike racks in the site plan for staff and for students. And then I look at this plan and I don't see any safe way for students to bike along Marin to get to the school. And I just think it's, I'm really disappointed in that. And I'm really disappointed in the fact that we would be spending money now on this short-term project that really lacks a long-term vision for Albany in terms of cycling and cycling infrastructure. I think it's, doing this and then just saying, that's it for the next 10, 15, 20 years on this street. I don't think that's the responsible thing to do. I think this project should be shelved and we should be studying the protected bike lanes and then using this money to implement that. And there are ways to do it safely at the intersections. There's ways to do it safely with pedestrians crossing. It actually makes it safer for pedestrians because the cyclists can go along the curb. You can have a separate bulb out that's further out that even shortens the crossing distance more. I really think it should be studied as part of our new active transportation plan. I just can't believe you're doing this without it being part of that study. It just seems like we've got it backwards. We should be doing this after our next round of the active transportation plan. I don't see how this conforms to our climate action and adaptation plan. I don't see how it conforms to complete streets. I do not see how it conforms to safe routes to school. We should have safe, protected bike lanes for kids to get to Marin School and all our other schools in town, including Ocean View. It's also a mess there. We need a full-on vision for how this is going to be implemented in Albany and make it safer for all cyclists and pedestrians. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Amy Smolins. Amy, please go ahead.
Hello again. So today I took a long bike ride around Alameda, around the main island and Bay Farm Island. And the thing that really stood out was the ton of school-age kids riding alone or in small groups without adults all over both islands. And my friend and I asked some of them for directions. Hey, what's the best way to get to blah, blah? And they always told us they knew the best bike routes and stuff. And that's because Alameda has a ton of bike infrastructure, including separated bike lanes and multi-use paths in various locations all around both islands. And a lot of those lead to schools, which is an intentional design. That's why so many kids were riding their bikes around there. It was amazing. It was really striking. Alameda has made a specific effort to have a lot of bike infrastructure that'll be safe for kids to ride on their own. And 2 days ago, this past Tuesday, Alameda City Council approved protected bike lanes on the western part of Central Avenue, which is a major road like Marin that is a high school, middle school, same building, high school, middle school, or same school, and an elementary school. So they approved that. So that's going to be done. And that's one way to get kids on their bikes and out of their parents' cars. I mean, I saw it today in Alameda. It was so obvious by seeing the kids and seeing all the bike infrastructure, safe bike infrastructure. Albany needs to do this. So please consider the ideas and plans that Ian McLeod and Dan Johnson have proposed and prepared and sent you and sent you documentation for. Make our roads safe for kids and for seniors and for everybody to ride their bikes from now going forward for the next 50 years. So let's do it. Let's be bold and not just go with something simple. Let's make it really safe for everybody. Thank you.
Chair McCluskey, I don't see any other public speakers. Yeah.
All right, great. Let's bring it back to the commission. Who would like to make comments? Commissioner Fong.
Sure, I can start. Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's very exciting that we're looking at this Marin project. I think there's a lot of potential there. I think I agree with some of the comments that I wish we could be a little bit more ambitious with what we're trying to do, especially with regard to the bike safety. I think for me, a minimum is a protected bike lane. And I'd love to see, even exploring having that on a raised sidewalk like we're doing, already on Buchanan. This could be an extension of that. Other ideas of how we can kind of prioritize bikes. Maybe, I know in DC they have, even two-way bikes on the same, right next to each other. And like that kind of creates a very contained bike lane. I mean, I'd really like to see how we can really make sure that this feels safe. Like the current plan to me doesn't feel like a very safe option for bikers. I don't know if I would love riding on that, and I definitely wouldn't like my kids to ride on that. So I think that's one thing that I'd like to see as a minimum that we can do, and maybe even extend kind of what we've already done on Buchanan. I think just in terms of how we can be more ambitious, I mean, even like, I don't know if you guys looked into getting rid of a lane of parking, like any sort of ways that we can just really be prioritizing the bikers is something that I think would be great. Secondly, I think just in terms of the ambition, I mentioned, I did look at that Ramona roundabout. I really love the idea of a roundabout. This is a little bit, big picture. I really think that in terms of not only the flow of the street, but also the beautification of Albany, it'd be great to have another roundabout like we have already on Marin, and maybe even consider that at Santa Fe. I just think that that's really going to add a lot of value to kind of make this really a boulevard that people are using, as well as add functionality there. So I think that that's something that I think deserves more attention. And then finally, just quickly, I'll say on the pedestrian front, I do think that, yeah, we want to have at least the four, I think 4 crosswalks is a good idea. I especially don't like the idea of adding plants to block people, who would want to take that crosswalk. So those are some of my thoughts. I just think that we really need to be more ambitious. I think it's a lot of great potential to make Marin a really cool, way for folks to walk and bike and also provide functionality for cars as well. But I think the bike lanes, and I'd really love to explore that roundabout idea. I just think that would add just so much, beautification and also some value to kind of the commuters and people like taking the streets.
Thank you. Other commissioners? Was it a hand, Commissioner Graham?
Sure, or what? Unless Robert wants to go first. I saw him unmuting too.
Go for it.
Okay. I have a question about the funding source so it's the annual street rehabilitation program, correct? And that is money that has to be used for the CIP?
I don't know that I could defer to city staff on that, but I don't know that it has to be used. It's just identified in your capital improvement plan as the funding source for this.
I would defer to city staff if I were you on that one.
I can double check the CIP, but I'm pretty sure it's Measure B, BB, VRF, direct local distribution funding is funding this project, which is our primary source for maintaining the roads.
Okay. And then
one of our engineers just showed her face, and I wonder if she had a comment to add to that.
Sure. So I just wanted to add that it's not a use it or lose it money. It's not. If we don't use it this year, we can use it next year.
Can you use it for, does it have to be used for capital improvements? Could this money be used to redo the ATP, or I'm sorry, to update the active transportation plan?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'm sorry. I can definitely speak to people on staff to figure that out and let everyone know.
If I could address the question about funding for planning, we're internally right now and soon going public with a draft budget for the next couple of years, and as part of that, we're certainly aware of the need to update the ATP. I can't say that we've reached any conclusions about how we're going to do that yet, but the operating budget is probably a better place to look for money for planning work. The CIP is more for when the planning is finished and the design and construction phases begin, and then the CIP is the budget source for the document.
So I guess this is questions and comments, correct?
Yes.
I mean, I think I have to agree with, I don't agree with all of the design recommendations from the members of the public that we've heard, but I do agree with the notion of it's a large investment at a time when I think a lot has changed in bicycle and pedestrian planning since the last time our plan was updated. And it is one of our major bikeways. And so I guess I do agree with the notion of prioritizing, looking at our design guidelines and everything else that is part of the active transportation plan before we do a large scale investment in this, whether it's monetary dollars or just the fact that we probably won't do it again for a long time. So I may remember something else that I have, but I'll let other commissioners go.
Great. Yes, you don't have to consider when you've made your comments that's the last you speak.
I know I might trigger another one. Yeah.
That's always fair.
Fair enough.
And we'll just assume that going forward. Okay. Other commissioners. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Thanks, and thanks for the presentation, and also thanks for the public comments. There are definitely some elements of the public comments that resonate with me, and I think looking at more of a complete streets approach, and also prioritizing cyclists and pedestrians more than what the proposal does would be good. What that exactly looks like, I'm not entirely sure, and then I think we should look at some alternatives. I think Commissioner Graham's idea of updating the ATP so that some of those alternatives can come through into the design of this corridor would be good. People brought up parking protected bike lanes. They definitely make some sense. I don't know if they're the right application on Marin. Marin has lots of curb cuts, and that's a challenge. It's a challenge for vehicles entering the roadway and have the right visibility for Marin, which has some high speed traffic. But I think that does speak to, we should look at some alternatives for further prioritizing pedestrian and cyclists. I think this is the time to look at four-leg crosswalks at all of the intersections. I think the visibility that it provides for the intersection is valuable in slowing down cars. I think three-legged intersections are always awkward for pedestrians and less visible for oncoming vehicles. The other comment I had was specifically on the buffer. I thought that there would be more value in having the buffer on the travel lane side than on the parking lane side. It's a 5-foot lane, so it already has some buffer built in for a car door. But when I'm traveling there with my kids on a bike, and they're pretty scared to travel on Marin, so they're on the sidewalk. But their fear is the vehicles traveling at high speeds on the left side of them, and that buffer definitely helps. And that's just one example, I think, of ways we can improve. You have a lot of roadway width here, so you have a lot to work with. And I think in terms of alternatives, sky's the limit. Of course, there's funding that we have to consider. But also, I think just looking on the horizon, there's probably going to be some infrastructure funding, whether it's at state, local, federal level, that can help with this effort. So I think now's the time to position ourselves to have a strong project on Marin. It is one of our key corridors, also one of our most dangerous ones. So this is a once in a lifetime opportunity for us to do the improvements. So I'll pause there and I'll let you know the other comments, but thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Chavandar.
Thanks. A lot of thoughts on this in no particular order, so I apologize if I seem to bounce around a bit. I guess as far as the idea of a protected bike lane, I worry a little bit in this case about the sight lines between bikes in the bike lane and cars traveling down the roadway. I frequently bike on Marin and often find myself kind of watching several cars ahead to see people not signaling with their turn signals, but signaling with their behavior that they're about to turn right. And that's, saved me from several potential collisions where they suddenly dart across the bike lane as I predicted based on their behavior. If I can't see them, I've got no warning. That makes me nervous. And it either means don't do a parking buffered bike lane, or it means do a buffered bike lane and get rid of all the parking. And if we want to do that, that's a whole nother big deal to, re-engage the community and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this great thing for bikes, but scrap all the parking on Marin. Doesn't mean it shouldn't be considered, but it's not a decision that we could make tonight. Another thing is I like the bulb outs on Lower Marin. Great for the crosswalks, really helps to narrow the feel of the roadway, makes the pedestrians visible at the crosswalks, but obviously that kind of conflicts, as has already been mentioned, with the idea of a parking buffered bike lane. One comment that kind of amused me, and not to say that I disagree with it, but I'll get to the point. The idea that the project should follow an ATP update, given that from my perspective, the project began in 1998 with the transportation management plan, And we broke it down into phases because it was just too big a project to put bulb outs at every corner up and down Marin and the bike lanes. We started with the paint only of the bike lanes. Then we moved to Buchanan bike path. And then we completed the next phase of Lower Marin. So if the project has to be broken down into more phases, as far as I'm concerned, so be it. But I also feel like standards and best practices and just ideas of things that can be done continue to evolve. And at any given point in time, we're going to make the best decisions we can with the tools we have available to us. So, you know, I'm fine with that. You know, always looking at what's the best choices we have is good. Looking just at the physical configuration of the roadway, there are places where the edge of the road drops off into the drainage. And I think that's something we'd have to look at very closely if we put the bike lanes curbside, that we have to do a lot more remediation of that, what's currently parking lane, where you don't really care if a parked car, you know, drops partway into the, you know, the drainage basin. But for a bike, that's, you know, potentially major crash going at 25 miles an hour in the downhill part. And as was already mentioned, the conflicts with driveways and cross streets, you know, where you're kind of trapped between the curb and a parked car, you don't have a lot of escape room, which is why, again, I kind of come back to that question of, can we have parking and a curbside bike lane? And I'm not convinced that that's possible to do both of those, at least from my comfort level. I also have, when my kids were much younger, rode in the bike lane and had them ride on the sidewalk. And that was okay. That worked fine to get to Masonic and use the Albany Greenway to get wherever we were going. So that's, you know, not a great solution. It's not a one size fits all by any means, but we kind of have two options when it comes to our kids. Another thought as far as the parking buffer, another trade-off was if you put the parking lane between the traffic lane and the bike lane, then pedestrians are going to be more obscured at the intersections unless you pull back the parking quite a ways from the crosswalk. So again, just thinking of pros and cons. And I do like the idea of creating the parking buffer by narrowing the center turn lane and narrowing the parking lanes. I think that taking a foot off the parking lane and dropping it from 8 feet to 7 feet kind of necessitates putting the buffer on the parked car side, because then the door zone is made more of a concern because you don't have, you know, the extra width of the parking lane to serve as part of the buffer as it is now. So that's a lot, and it's not leading to any particular conclusion, but just wanted to share my thoughts. Thanks.
Thank you. Well, I too have a lot of thoughts, and I want to thank the staff and the consultants for coming up with the presentation and the plans so far. I've got some thoughts, and they're going to come out sort of random too. There have been a couple of comments about buffer placement, both by public comment and then by Javdal. I think, yeah, it's really critical when you're going downhill at speed to be out of the door zone. It's less critical when you're going uphill, except that now with electric bikes, people are going uphill really fast. So that's kind of mitigated. Certainly if we're talking about a protected bike lane, then and drop off gutters and the gutter pan, and we're probably talking about sharing the buffering so that you know, some of it ends up between the cars and the bike lane, and some ends up between the bike lane and the curb, and possibly between the parked cars and the roadway, because now you've got people opening doors into the roadway on a road that has, you know, not immaterial speed. I guess what this is leading up to is, you know, I would be very interested in seeing what it would take to put buffered cycling lanes on Marin. I actually have been disappointed that we did the phase 3 of the Buchanan project and lower Marin before it became really clear that buffered cycling lanes have a huge impact on the number of cyclists who will venture out onto a busy street. We've talked about some of the mitigating features, like all the driveways and the street crossings. The thing about Marin is that many of the streets that empty onto Marin are not heavily traveled avenues, except where there are signals like at Masonic and Santa Fe. And the driveways are not commercial, they're residential. So we're not seeing huge numbers of crossings, which is very different than if you were trying to put a buffered bike lane on someplace like San Pablo. It's just a whole different animal. By the way, Mr. Clark, I was amused by your characterization of this as the residential area. I'm sorry, the rural area of Albany. I think of this as sort of a suburban area, but we all have our different viewpoints. That tickled me. Come walk with us on the hill sometime, or out on the boat. So if you were looking at protected bike lanes, it would be possible, if you had parking protected bike lanes, to pull bulb outs or create bulb outs that were more islands at the ends of the parking zones and provide a platform for pedestrians at those locations, and shorten the crossings and the exposure of pedestrians. Personally, I feel that there's a trade-off between having crossings on every arm, especially north-south, and having and also having the opposite, where you might only have the one crossing, but then motorists know that there are two places that they look for people crossing, two sides, as opposed to four corners. So I think there's a trade-off there that we haven't addressed that should be considered. The bioswale that is planned for the north side of Marin between Masonic and Key Route. It strikes me that if you're eliminating parking there, you could make the bioswale the protection for a bike lane in that area, and perhaps dig up less of the cement that's already there, and dig in an area where you're already digging for the roadway. I'm not sure exactly how the catchment area for turning cyclists would operate. I haven't seen something like that before, and it's I'm just not sure how that would exactly work. But I see that something could work out there, and maybe it's just a matter of the details. But if you've got strong conflict between right turning autos and turning or continuing cyclists, then I think a protected cycling lane and signalization to support it would be a much stronger and safer answer. So one of the comments, Mr. Clark, that you made was that if there was a protected cycling lane and a vehicle was making a turn, then cyclists would have to. Oh, I'm sorry. If a vehicle was coming, a motorist was coming out of a side street, they'd have to creep forward and block the cycling lane. And that may be true, but there's also the space between the cycling lane and the driving lane that the cyclist could maneuver through. And if the vehicle was all the way into that area, then there's also the possibility of going behind that vehicle. So I think there's a lot of space there. So, you know, I want to thank members of the public for their comments and their detailed letters to this body, and you know, trying to shake loose some other ideas. And I'm interested in seeing how we could possibly do more. I agree wholeheartedly with especially Ian McLeod about the lack of support of cycling on Marin. I'm a cycling instructor. I teach cycling. And by the way, fellow commissioner, I teach that you never want to have your kids on the sidewalk and you in the street, because then as a cyclist, your brain is actually on the sidewalk. And we don't want you being sort of a headless cyclist. So unfortunately, the law in Albany is that you know, adults are not supposed to bike on the sidewalk, but it's my recommendation that parents bike with their children on the sidewalk for that period of time when their kids are too young to go on the street, because it's much easier to communicate with your kids, and you're all there together in the same space and cycling in the same space. That aside, it is only the more secure cyclists, of which I have not been for more than about 15 years, who will take the cycling lanes on Marin by themselves and use it on a regular basis. And that's been sort of proven by the level of usage that we see on Marin. It's not a heavily used bikeway. It is used, it's valued, but it's not a go-to for most people. And it does not support all ages and abilities. Whereas a protected cycleway with lots of gaps for driveways and streets, which allow you to see the traffic that you're going near, does provide a lot more comfort for more people, and I think would be much greater used, and provide support for getting people out of their cars and onto their bikes. Thank you for listening. That was quite long. Other commissioners had said they might come up with more. Are there more comments? Commissioner Graham, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I guess, summarize where I stood on everything. And so, Commissioner Javandal, I appreciate your point about it's always time for another plan. And so I guess my point is I'm hopeful that when we talk about our work plan, we can look at updating the ATP within our next work cycle. But at the same time, I also think that we should continue phasing this project according to the design guideline, the design standards that we have already implemented in the western portion of Marin. So the part that's already been done, rather than directing us to create new design guidelines, which is essentially value engineering the other to make it fit the whole 3/4 of a mile. So I guess my recommendation to this plan would be figure out how much you have in your budget and how much you can actually replicate the design that we've already installed in the western portion of Marin near Stanage or wherever it ends, rather than making the sacrifice of not having the four-way crossings and the bulb outs, because I do think that you're essentially like, I think our goal here should be a consistent sort of pedestrian and bicycle connection all along Marin. And then I just personally wanted to weigh in on, the bike, the buffering and the location is, I agree that I don't actually think from a safety perspective that switching the bikes and the parking is a good idea because of the drainage and the driveway and the bulb out issues that we've talked about. But that's not to say that I don't think we could, in the next ATP, come up with improvements in how we could either make the existing class 2 bike lanes more visible or more buffered. But I don't think like we holistically want to make a switch, especially at this point when we already have one sort of implementation on the western half of Marin. So I just wanted to be a little more definitive on how I felt about those things.
Other comments? Mr. Clark.
Yeah, I just, I'd be remiss if I didn't just highlight the fact that this project as presented significantly improves the corridor. It fixes hundreds of deficiencies in the roadway. There are many, many curb ramps that are actually, the sidewalk is flush with the road surface that allows vehicles to cut the curb. New bulb outs and curbs installed will act as a barrier to motorists and really formalize and slow down vehicle movements. And so I just want to highlight that this project as proposed will really have a significant impact on the corridor and improvement to the corridor. You'll get nighttime reflectivity improvements with all of the new striping. And I just want to close and add by saying that while not all of the ideas that you're entertaining may fit into the current civil improvements, there is an opportunity to look at switching bike lanes and parking and bollards and mountable bollards, all sorts of other elements that come along with a routine maintenance sealing of the roadway. Every 5 to 7 years, you're resurfacing the roadway to preserve what you've installed with a slurry coat or other micro seal treatment. That's an opportunity to relook at striping. And that time period may give you time to do some of the things you're talking about, look at the ATP and look at implementing some of these improvements in the future. So I just wanted to add that stuff for y'all to chew on, but I really appreciate the comments and all the public comment.
Yeah, I think my comments though, like you shouldn't go all the way up the hill with the civil improvements if they're not, what we really, really want them to be. So I'd rather see us do 1/4 of a mile of the 3/4 of a mile and then find the money for the last, 1/4 of a mile so that it's all, we can provide the 4-way crosses and 4-way crossings and bulb outs consistently. That's all.
Commissioner Zavino.
I want to say I agree with Commissioner Graham that a good option would be to shorten the length of the project and use the same standards we've got on the western part of Marin. From a pedestrian perspective, that is definitely a good way to go. Again, I have no problem with phasing things. If we've got the money for a certain amount, we should do that. A specific idea is the bike waiting area westbound at Masonic to turn southbound and cross Marin. I would be inclined to suggest that rather than just a pull-out area, that be a ramp up onto the sidewalk so bikes can get themselves turned and aligned with the crosswalk where everyone kind of knows to expect what they're going to do next. Certainly, that's what I see people eastbound doing. They come up Marin, they cross Masonic, they pull up the curb ramp onto the sidewalk there, turn their bikes and get ready to head northbound. I think that would work perfectly on the other side as well if we just gave them a ramp up onto the sidewalk. I agree with the comment that, to use an old phrase, the bike lanes are just paint as proposed and could be changed the next time we do a slurry seal on the road. So if we change our minds, we could change that stuff around. Obviously, that's a little bit at odds if we start to do bulb outs everywhere. but that may be another argument for, do bulb outs as far as we can afford it and then leave the rest for a future decision. My last comment is that there are definitely some bad spots in the pavement. And I think just repaving the road by itself would be a safety enhancement, even if we didn't change anything out there. So I'm a little hesitant to put this off. Not the least of which is, well, normally I would say, putting off paving means you're going to have to go with a more extensive paving project. This one sounds pretty darn extensive already, so we're probably just about at a full rebuild at this point. I don't know if that's the case, or if staff thinks that waiting is going to ramp up our long-term paving cost. So I'll leave that maybe as a question.
It would not at this point. I don't recall the paving condition index rating for this. We're seeing a lot of top-down failures, which would just result in more maintenance time, but the paving strategy to correct the deficiencies shouldn't change substantially over the next few years.
Thank you.
Other commissioner comments? Seeing none, how about this? I see there's sort of maybe three paths forward in terms of adapting the bike issues specifically. One would be going forward with the plans as presented. Another would be asking for a version of plans that would include hardscape for protected bike lanes. But another might be one that reduced the amount of hardscape, and especially hardscape into Marin, and prioritized using bollards and paint to create a parking protected bike lane on the road. Thoughts?
Those sound right to me.
Do we need all three of them?
Oh, as alternatives? Were you suggesting as alternatives?
I'm suggesting those might be three main alternatives, and I'm wondering if we need all three of them going forward, or if we're interested in all three of them.
Yeah, I think all three would be one alternatives that we would want to see, so we can make informed decisions on them.
I'm wondering if reducing the amount of hardscape might open up some opportunities for spending more money on crosswalks north-south. I'm worried that if we do put in hardscape into Marin, that our opportunities later for creating a protected bike lane, if it is chosen in the future, will be reduced.
I was thinking that you would have looked at hardscape treatments that would allow for protected bike lanes.
So when we're talking about protected bike lanes, though, it seems like there's like the terminology you're saying. I mean, because you can have a protected, like a bollard protected bike lane in the location where it is, which is one thing if you made more space, correct? But then you're saying switching bike lanes and parking.
I guess from my experience, I'm assuming switching bike lanes and parking. Now, I could be wrong, and that could be part of what gets investigated.
I think the other alternative, other than this and parking protected, would be to remove parking.
I'm sorry, to remove?
To remove parking. I think that's the only other alternative to another type of protected bike lane design.
Yeah, and that's something that I think is something worth considering. That would provide the safety considerations that we need in terms of vision, while also perhaps providing a protected bike lane. But but just to kind of read out what you were saying, Ken, I think, yeah, for me, I think, yeah, that I would like to prioritize a protected bike lane over kind of building out any sort of hard, any sort of development that could get in the way of that. I prefer to wait if like we were going to build something now that would get in the way of something like a protected bike lane.
Yeah, Commissioner Graham, I guess thinking about it, my response to a bollard protected bike lane on Marin would be that, in general, that would force bikes into the door zone more, or tend to. It might be appropriate, especially on the downhill side, but when Marin flattens out, that's less of a there's also a speed differential. And it also occurs to me in general that a parking removal or even a parking protected bike lane could be created as a two-way lane on one side of the street as an alternative. So there's things to, I believe there are things to investigate. So I guess I'm wondering if we want to direct the consultants and staff to come back with further investigated plans and what we should ask for.
Well, that was a lot. So I'm sure Mr. Clock has some budget he's working towards. So I think we probably need to give him a little bit more guidance on that one. I'm not quite sure what it is, but
that's what I'm trying to lead to.
Commissioner Bell, I think, was
yes, he did
before I interrupted.
No, that's okay. Commissioner Javidal.
Just putting myself in the queue, no problem. I think what looks like 4 alternatives, as have been discussed, probably merits further discussion and a little bit of technical analysis and feedback to us. As much as I hate to delay the project, it's a big decision, and worth putting a little more time into. I think that in terms of sort of fleshing out what we expect from some of these, maybe, I don't know if staff wants to come back with more questions before proposing any more detail, because there are definitely some scoping considerations for some of these. As an example, I think both for the protected bike lanes with hardscape or the protected bike lanes after removing parked cars, either way, I would be really interested in having those include pedestrian islands for pedestrians waiting to cross Marin. So if you've got a floating parking lane with a curbside bike lane, the end of that parking lane should now be a concrete island that pedestrians can wait on with a cut through channel for ADA access and all, of course, but where they're at the edge of the traffic lane in a protected area waiting to cross the road, where they're visible to cars on the street so cars can yield to them. And I think alternatively with option 4, if there's no parking, you still want something like that, where pedestrians can get across the bike lane, have a space that they can wait for a gap in the car traffic so they can get across. And like I say, that's an example of some of the nuances that might come out. But if we ask staff to come back with some ideas about these different alternatives, I'd either want them to flesh it out and tell us what it would look like, or return with some questions on, do you want A or B type of trade-offs?
Sure.
And maybe we should ask staff.
Yeah, I think we're at that point.
Yeah, I mean, the more narrowly you can tailor the options that you want, the more efficient I'll be in working towards that with the consultants. So, I appreciate all the comments, and I understand what you're trying to do. it will take more analysis where you have a bulb out and you have parking and you want to create, I'll call it a slip lane or a through lane for cyclists. You need to then separate out and make this sort of pedestrian refuge island. And that is now, approaching the edge of the vehicular way, but it has minimum dimensions it needs to be for ADA and turning radius and drainage impacts that all need to be analyzed. And so we have the resources to do that. I'm very confident in CSG's ability to do that. It just, we'd probably want to look at, just in terms of efficiency, maybe key intersections or a segment of roadway rather than the whole corridor, just so we can get some concurrence that we're headed in the right direction before we spend too much time looking at all of that. And for lack of, I'm happy to do a walk with people and to discuss, but I think the best thing, I'm an avid cyclist myself, the best thing is to consider yourself on a bike in a protected bike lane, traveling down Marin at speed and being behind a row of cars. You're going to have to travel 300 feet on a bike going 25 miles an hour and stop at that, not stop, but really consider vehicular movements at every intersection as you travel down Marin. Whereas as presented, and the reason that we kind of went with this other direction was because as you're doing that, as currently presented in the concept, if a car does pull out, nose out past the stop sign to make a right or a left onto Marin, and the cyclist is traveling at vehicular speeds, they have an option to take the lane or move out into traffic and avoid a collision. So there's a lot of considerations that come into play. I really appreciate the comments and the opportunity to look at that option. We did lightly flesh it out and decided that it was better in the existing configuration. So I'm just speaking out loud and thinking out loud with some of the things that come to my mind as a designer and working with Albany planners and figuring this out. So if you can narrowly tailor, what you want us to look at, that will really help in returning to you with some efficiency and addressing the issues.
And if I could add to that, we do appreciate the commission's feedback and the public feedback, and maybe we need to spend a little time just developing some of these ideas and putting them on paper so people can see the details. And as the commission knows, nothing is ever easy in Albany with these things. There's always compromises, and having that down on paper for the commission to see and react to might lead to a more obvious solution one way or the other.
Mm-hmm. So maybe taking an intersection or two and or a block with two intersections and showing us some options.
Yeah, and we wouldn't want to do the whole, whatever option, we don't want to do the full design on all four options all at once. I think, particularly if we start in on it, we see something that is obviously the best solution or something is obviously not going to be acceptable. So yes, I think to answer your respond to your comment, I think that is the best approach and the most cost efficient and most time efficient way to do it as well.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Graham, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, thank you.
Commissioner Falk.
Yeah, I'll just say, I support that approach that Commissioner Javindal mentioned of, especially having options and, if possible, we can, have the costs associated if that is a constraint for us. So that we can say, all right, these are the trade-offs here for these different types of options, and for, an example block, this is how it would look. I think that's a reasonable approach. But I do like the idea of having some other options. I think, based on the feedback from the community, I think a lot of people, there's a lot more ideas for how to improve this plan than there was in support of how it is currently.
And with respect to the financial aspects of it, I think it is a multidimensional problem because it's not, we're talking about a stream of revenue, and not only is it kind of the physical scope of the project and the timing of the implementation of the project, but it's the trade-off between if we put more money here, what are we not doing someplace else for a longer period of time? So those are all things that maybe we need to flesh out a little bit more for you when you next discuss this.
Commissioner Javindal.
I'm going to take a stab at a motion here to try to give some clear guidance and see if we all agree, which is we ask staff to take a look at the 4 options. Option 1 being to proceed as presented. Option 2 being protected bike lanes with hardscape. Option 3 being parking protected bike lane, possibly with paint and bollards. Option 4 being to remove the parking and provide a protected bike lane with hardscape. And when I'm talking about hardscape, I'm thinking the pedestrian islands or similar treatments. And that what is brought back to the commission is a sample treatment, either intersection or a block length to give us an example of what it would look like, some drawings and some cost assessment.
And you probably said this, but the trade-offs between potential or sort of safety benefits versus drawbacks for different users.
Yeah, listing the pros and cons of each option. Thank you.
And to clarify, Commissioner Jomindal, that 4th option was the option without parking blocking, but it was protected with bollards.
Right, with bollards or concrete, or kind of leave it open, because there are different alternatives. You could just do it with paint, but that's not doing much, especially if we want to have protected pedestrian crossing islands. Right, so from my perspective, where the pedestrians are waiting, I'm not okay with just bollards. I'd like raised concrete, something that cars don't feel like they can hit and get away unscathed. That's my personal preference on it. But again, whatever staff thinks is viable, they may run into design considerations as they go, but I think something solid.
That makes sense. Yeah, I'm overall supportive of that motion. I the other idea that I have, I don't know how others folk, I still am excited about this roundabout idea that was considered in the initial plan. I would like to explore that as well. I don't know how others feel about that, but that is something I think that would add a lot of value to Marin Avenue. Just throwing that out there. I won't push on it too hard, but I think that it really would add a lot of value to our community.
We wouldn't have to let that go completely. Certainly, we could pick that up as we look at the next ATP. I haven't heard anybody else mention that particular item. The other thing that we've talked about, but that didn't get captured so far in the motion, is the number of north-south crosswalks at intersections. And I don't know how we address that. There seemed to be interest from the commission and from the public for a greater number of north-south crosswalks. And, there's a cost consideration there. There's a design consideration.
Well, I think overall, you essentially need if we're going to say do the design guidelines that we've already installed in the western portion of Marin, if we take that and don't value engineer it, how many linear feet, how many blocks can we get with, or how much does it cost us to get that all the way to the border, right? So we're not value engineering these crosswalks out. It's just like understanding how much more money we would need to basically keep up the standard that we've already installed.
I have to say, Commissioner Graham, that I don't see the plans that we were presented tonight as being overall equivalent exactly to what was installed in the western portion.
I agree with you. And what I'm saying is they have value engineered out crosswalks and bulb outs in places where we would have had them. So what I'm asking is that we understand how much it would cost to have not done that value engineering so that we could do this full 3/4 of a mile, right? So that we're not value engineering essentially.
Could we ask for that to be a variant for each one of the alternatives to tell us what the differential would be between going with all 4 crosswalks or just 3?
That sounds good. I will add that Commissioner Graham seems to indicate that it's really fully supported crosswalks with bulb outs and not just.
Well, I guess value engineering to me is like, I could understand if the drainage issue is a reason to not have a bulb out, or if there's some sort of existing condition there where we wouldn't want to have a bulb out because it doesn't create the ideal pedestrian situation. But I would assume that the ideal pedestrian situation would be the double bulb out and crosswalk on either side, and then the north-south crosswalk on either side. Does that make sense? Or apparently not?
I agree. Makes sense.
Okay, great. Thanks for the
That
nod.
does make some sense to me. I'm sorry, I'm not nodding, but because I'm thinking about the fact that, you know, it is sloped much more so in this area. So it's a bit of a different animal. So how can we add this in to the motion?
Well, I'm going to stop talking.
I would just amend the motion to say that for each of the 4 alternatives, we ask for a cost differential to add in the 4th crosswalk. And any commentary on feasibility. I mean, I agree there may be places for drainage or other reasons there is a technical feasibility issue, but I think to a large extent what we've been hearing is it's a cost feasibility issue. There is, and now I'm kind of going beyond the motion itself, but the concept that you're focusing driver attention at 1 crosswalk instead of 2, and it's easier to observe both ends of 1 crosswalk than to try to scan all 4 points. Even on my bike, I gotta say that's easier to manage. But you know, I'm not saying that 1 is necessarily better. For a driver who's trying to pay attention, that might slow them down more, because now they're busier trying to look at more things and they have to slow down to be able to take in that much. I think that's a decision that maybe we push to later, but let's get the technical cost side of it now.
Focus in on how we can make overall decisions about how we want to proceed, and then get more specific later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw a couple of hands, Commissioner Del Rosario and then Jeff Bond.
I hope I don't add another alternative or need to make an amendment, but the removal of parking to create a protected bike lane with bollards, that would be the removal of parking on both sides of the streets, correct? Unless we looked at a cycle track on one side of the street, which probably has some transition challenges when you get to the west end. But that would preserve one side of parking along Marin. And I don't know if that's, I think I heard another commissioner mention, maybe Commissioner McCroskey, you had mentioned that. So I don't know if that's something else that we need to consider as an alternative.
How about if we leave that to staff to consider and let us know what they think or what they suggest in terms of one side or both sides for removing parking?
Maybe a qualitative assessment of that would be useful. Just, you know, how many signal controlled intersections are going to have to be revamped to support that, or
the high level conceptual layout of that.
Yeah, I mean, for example, it works great on Buchanan, where we have 1 cross street on the south side of Buchanan versus multiple cross streets on the north side. So we're really simplifying it there. Versus on Marin with so many cross streets, I think it would be very different. So yeah, I don't know. My personal preference leans towards a protected bike lane on each side, 1-way bike lanes versus a 2-way on one side. Though I do agree the potential to preserve at least parking on one side of the street would be potentially feasible if it's a 2-way cycle track on one side. But that may be, I don't know. I would suggest staff at least give us a qualitative assessment of it if they feel like that can't be done without giving us the technical aspect, go ahead and include it as a fifth alternative.
So Chair McCroskey, if I may pose at least in a meeting management, a future meeting management question to the commission. Whenever we talk about street parking, we have a substantial meeting on our hands. I think all of you right now, your heads are more in the technical and the engineering, and we could spend a lot of time, and we should spend a lot of time with you on those issues. If we talk about removing street parking on Marin, I'm sorry, but you all know what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering whether you want to have both of those discussions in one evening. And maybe we start with some engineering and technical issues on 3 of the 4. And you might come to a conclusion like, we really need to open up that parking issue. In which case, then we would feel obligated to engage the residents along there to make them aware of that. And at least be able to have a work session like this that we've had tonight without a more something that will be inevitably become focused on parking. That also gives us a little bit more time to do, say, some parking surveys if we're going to go there, to really analyze that carefully and do some proper parking surveys up and down, explore other ways of managing parking. There's lots of discussion in the community these days about that. And so it really, I don't think we can look at that in a vacuum. I think we have to look in a broader perspective, and maybe we need to do that for other reasons as well.
Jeff, I'll just note that the parking protected options also will likely be for visibility, removing parking as well. So that's not part of those alternatives as well.
Right. With both of those in mind, might it make sense to pick a block to identify so that we're not triggering the households all along Marin? Would that be an effective way to limit the discussion? Or is that not sufficient?
I think that would allow us at least to make it a little bit more of a technical discussion. But sooner or later, if you're going to talk about a project that takes out a substantial number of street parking spaces, we do need to engage the community and hear them out and try to help mitigate anything that comes out of that discussion.
Well, what I hear staff asking is to look at 3 of the alternatives for one block initially, and then make a decision at that time whether it makes sense to look at alternatives that remove parking. I'm not opposed to that. And Commissioner Javidal?
I'm happy to change the motion to reflect that, in particular because I think that either of the options that remove parking are really a variant of option 2, which is the protected bike lanes. So it's replacing the parking with some kind of hardscape or landscape or other buffer, but otherwise the geometry may be very similar. Mm-hmm. So I'm fine with limiting it to the 3 options for starters, and then we can consider the options without parking if we feel like option 2 looks promising, except for the presence of parking.
Great. So is there further discussion? Is anybody ready to second the motion?
I would be happy to second the motion.
Great. Any last discussion before voting? Seeing none, do we need to take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Del Rosario?
Yes.
Commissioner Graham?
Yes.
Commissioner Davindo?
Aye.
Vice Chair Fong?
Aye.
Chair McCroskey?
Yes. Well, thank you to everyone for that discussion and the presentation and the work that's already been put in, and hopefully we can build on that. And with that, we'll move along to the next item on our agenda. It switches windows and comes up cold. This is
Allison,
the,
Ernest.
sorry?
I'm removing Allison and Ernest and thanking them.
Oh, yes, and thank you to all.
Thank you.
We're going to move on to item number 5.2, the sugar sweetened beverage tax recommendation. And I'll hand off to staff.
Thank you. Just shuffling panelists. Hold on a second.
What you need to do.
Thank you, Chair. So this item is a continuation of last month's discussion. It's regarding use of an estimated $250,000 in tax proceeds from the 1-cent tax on distributing sugar sweetened beverages. And the aim of the ordinance was to apply the revenue towards health and well-being. The commission requested prior program cost information, which is provided here. The largest cost item by far is the school crossing guard program, which is estimated in the $150,000 to $160,000 range for the coming year. The Safe Routes to School Bike Ed program is $15,000, and the Healthy Me Music and Movement program is $12,500 from previous years. This shows the estimated balance after the two programs discussed for recommendation by the commission last month, as well as for the third program, which has been funded in prior years. And the commission asked for a staff recommendation for a potential capital project in the range of the remaining balance. And staff is recommending a sidewalk shaving program. This would enable the city to expand upon the recently completed sidewalk shaving that was funded through a grant from the Alameda County Transportation Commission and continue that on other streets. And again, the process is the commission submits a recommendation to council that would then be presented along with recommendations from other entities at upcoming study session, which is looking like it'll take place on May 17th. And with that, I'll open it up to discussion.
Mr. Freed, can we go back to the second slide? It was the second slide. Yes. Could you explain, so this is the estimate and then the balance is the remainders or?
Yes, sorry. It's a little complicated way to do it, but I wasn't sure if the third program you wanted to assume for this year or just the two that the commission was previously discussing recommending. So that gives you both sets of numbers. If it's just looking at the balance after the first two programs, it's in the $75,000 to $85,000 range. If it's after all three programs, it's $62,000 to $72,000.
Great. And as you say, this is just the amount of space that we've taken up, or the amount of funds that we've taken up from the sugar sweetened beverages funds in the past. It's not necessarily that we have some sort of allocation. We're just making recommendations.
That's correct. You wanted cost information on the existing programs to know what the remaining dollars might be in play, if assuming that those recommendations were carried this year.
So do we have a request from the, I guess the school district or whoever for the Healthy Me Music and Movement program this year?
I don't know. I haven't followed whether that has been recommended by any of the other bodies. Wasn't part of the recommendation from this commission previous years.
All right. So let's do commission questions. Commissioner Del Rosario.
Yeah, thanks. Justin, the sidewalk shaving cost, let me know if this is how it would work. Would this be used for additional sidewalk shavings that were identified in our pedestrian or our sidewalk improvement plan and the tax that's there, and just be an add-on to that? And so we get to do more in this next year? Or can you explain that if I'm off base?
Yeah, our sidewalk rehabilitation program focuses more on reconstruction of segments of sidewalk, and this was added on to that this past year with this grant to focus on areas that didn't need the reconstruction but could be extended in their access and usefulness by just shaving down where there were smaller steps or issues. So it was recommended this first phase was primarily on, I think, the PED network access to Solano Avenue. There was a business support recovery component of that effort. And so that was what it was focused on this past year.
And so we were going to do some of it, and we're going to be able to do more of it now with this additional funds, correct, or proposal?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Fong.
Yeah, and just as a question, in terms of why you chose the shaving, did you also consider just the sidewalk rehabilitation program generally, or is there? I'm just curious if you consider that as well, or why you focused on that one piece of it.
That has a separate funding source and is a ongoing program as well. This other one, I think, doesn't have identified. The shaving component, I think, is not where we've put that other parcel. I guess parcel tax. What's funded the sidewalk repair program is an ongoing source for a number of years still, and that project is continuing. And I don't remember. I know that's what we've used that money for in the past. I don't remember if that's couldn't be applied towards shaving or not.
Kind of, thanks.
Other commissioner questions? Seeing none, let's open it up to public comment.
I see two hands up. Kim Toussaint, please go ahead.
Hi, Commissioners. Thank you very much for taking my comment. I think I'm the lone representative of the school district, Albany Unified School District, tonight on this meeting. I wanted to say, first off, that the district is extremely grateful to the city for continuing to fund the school crossing guards. We consider that really a very essential part of helping parents feel safe allowing their kids to walk to school. And also it was mentioned about the Healthy Me Music and Movement program. And I know that the district would very much like to continue that program. So we will be putting forward that as a project at the May 17th workshop, just to provide a little bit of information about it. It's a nutrition program for our very youngest learners, preschool and kindergarten children, about drinking water instead of sugar sweetened beverages and maintaining a healthy diet. And it's actually a really fun program for the kids, and we would very much like to keep that going. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, Amy Smolins, please go ahead.
Hello, old friends. It's a great idea to spend this money on sidewalk shaving. There are a lot of locations where sidewalks have been shaved to make them more walkable and rollable, and it's terrific. But in the sidewalk rehabilitation funding that we have, bike paths and multi-use paths aren't included. So I would like to request that you include bike paths and multi-use paths in this recommendation. If there's a big bump or a separation or roots lifting on the Ohlone Greenway or the Buchanan path or any other multi-use path, they should be able to shave those or otherwise repair them to make them safe. For example, as many of you probably know, there's been a huge bump on the Greenway just south of Portland for about a year and a half. And I just heard from Public Works today, and they said it's going to be addressed soon. But with a dedicated program for working on the sidewalks and paths, bike paths and multi-use paths, this could have been done a year ago. So northbound cyclists wouldn't have had to, approaching Portland, wouldn't have had to veer out of their lane to and into the oncoming bike lane for a year and a half. So please include bike paths and multi-use paths in your recommendation to help keep everyone safe. Thank you.
Chair McCrusky, I don't see any other public speakers on this item.
Thank you. Comments by commissioners? I'll start off then. Thank you, Amy. I think it may not be clear that the shaving only really works on cement. And I'm certainly open to including bike paths and bikeways in the shaving if adjusting the purview of that is available to this commission. But for example, the bump you talked about on the Greenway is asphalt and would not be addressed through shaving. And most of the pathways, including the Buchanan pathway, is mostly made up of asphalt, just to be clear. Other commissioner comments? I'm certainly in favor of advancing the crossing guards, bike ed, sidewalk shaving, and possibly even the healthy movement to City Council as recommended for funding under the sugar sweetened beverage. Do others have diverging views, or would somebody like to propose a motion?
Well, based on the comments from Amy, can we add it similar to the whatever technical thing we need to do to updating the asphalt in bike lanes or paths? Can we have that be in addition to the sidewalk shaving?
Staff?
It's your recommendation, yeah.
I mean, I guess like whatever it's called, I would lump or I would put those things together in terms of like, call it something like, it's sort of like temporary mitigations for pedestrian and bike paths or access or something like that, which allows the money to be used for either the sidewalk improvements or the bike lane improvements to be identified by, Public Works as needed or whatnot.
I would like to just seek a little clarification. The sidewalk shaving is all off-street. And we might want to be more specific in our language. Are we talking about both off-street and on-street bike lanes and paths? There's a sewer grate at the northeast corner of Marin and San Pablo that could sure use some shaving, and it's in the street. But I think that might also be able to be addressed otherwise.
My recommendation would be to allow it to be used for shaving or whatever we call it for the asphalt, fill in the blank at the discretion of. I'm sorry.
You can't shave asphalt.
That's what I'm saying, or fill in the blank for whatever the process is to repair a similar problem, which I know it's not the same problem, but the problem being sort of a localized fix that's needed, and let it be at the direction of Public Works to prioritize where that needs to happen based on the available funds. I'll just keep talking, so I'll stop.
No, that's okay. We'll do it. Commissioner Fong?
Yeah, I'm open to Commissioner Graham's suggestion and Amy's suggestion of how we can use it to improve some of those, like the Loney Greenway. I know last meeting I had mentioned also improving the wayfinding to the Bay Trail, which is somewhat related to this. I mean, I think that would also help the healthiness of our kids and our community. So that's something that I would be interested to include as well. But I know we have limited funds.
Commissioner Del Rosario.
The one thing about improving sidewalks is that we've analyzed and inventoried where we have issues. So I don't know, does the staff have an idea of the bike path and bike facility issues that need to be improved, or is that some sort of additional analysis or survey work? So there is some simplicity. I mean, I think it's great that we want to try to improve all of our facilities with the dollars, but I know there's some simplicity in that we've already done the survey work for all of the sidewalks.
There are some known path issues that have been identified, but I agree. I don't think they were part of the sidewalk survey, so they're not done citywide at that level.
Another consideration, if I may, Chair McClaskey, is I'm just in trying to translate what the commission is discussing in here to how the Public Works Department operates on a regular basis. And I'm kind of winging it here. It's without Mark being with us this evening, it's a little hard, but some of the repairs, such as was mentioned, public speaker Amy mentioning repair on the Greenway, the delay is not because we don't have money, it's because we don't have people to do it. Sidewalk shaving is something that we can, it's something we can contract out. There's people who specialize that, and they have the specialized equipment. So it's kind of a discrete program. And if I'm hearing you right, and you please correct me if I'm wrong, what you're really suggesting is we should increase funding for more maintenance capacity for maintaining both the sidewalk, which we can contract out for, and small asphalt patches, which is probably more using existing city staff. Is that what I'm hearing?
I think you're correct in your characterization. Do we have any disagreements on that from commissioners?
And then, if I may, at that point, it's our maintenance staff triage things based on a variety of criteria, and just because there's money may not mean there's money to do it. Doesn't mean it's necessarily the first thing they're going to do. If there's a sewer overflowing someplace, they've got to go do that, with or without this allocation. So it's just kind of it's administrative complexity that I just want to make sure that the commission appreciates. We certainly can take your recommendation and try to emphasize these repairs, but it still has to compete with other maintenance responsibilities if we're using existing staff.
Well, let me suggest a compromise based on the nature of the original request, which was, as we understand it now, that staff is seeking to increase contracting out, or the implementation, the speed of contracting out, sidewalk shaving as a solution. Perhaps we can widen it just a bit to say to include off-street cement on off-street bike trails, if that should come up. as opposed to adding a completely different type of material and verging into maintenance instead of a particular program. Yes, Commissioner Grant.
I guess you're saying that it's not possible to contract out like small asphalt patching?
That, I'm afraid I'm not the best person to answer that question. I think our practice now is to do it internally. If there may be people who can do that, I don't know enough about it. I'm just kind of taking care of things for Mark while he's out. But I do know we contract out for the sidewalk shaving. I know that's a very specialized company I think that's all they do. And that's pretty easy to contract for.
Commissioner Zonabell. You're muted.
Thank you. I was just going to suggest maybe, given that we don't know what Public Works staff is going to be able to do, we put some flexibility into it and make it funding for path repair and/or wayfinding signage. Because I'm assuming we can get a sign contractor to fabricate signs and get those installed, you know, even if, you know, Public Works is too busy to do asphalt repair. So we get something out of it. So if I understand the funding, a tentative motion would be 160,000 for the crossing guards, 15,000 for the Safe Routes to School bike education, 12,500 for Healthy Me music and movement, 50,000 for sidewalk shaving, and another 12,500 for path repair and signs, wayfinding signs. And that gets us to 250,000. So that would be my motion.
Discussion, seconding?
I would second that.
Oh, I was going to suggest, sorry, Commissioner.
No.
I was going to suggest just rather than breaking up the last 50,000 and 12,000, why don't you just lump them all into one thing? Because they're all sort of like at the, you know, so that we're not tied into spending 12,000 and 50,000, but just making it more sort of at the staff's discretion so that we can get the best use out of it. So
62,500 for sidewalk shaving, path repair, and signs. That's fine.
Thanks for humoring me.
Commissioner Fong, are you willing to re-second that motion?
I think I see them as kind of discrete types of buckets, but I don't feel very strongly on it. But I do think that, you know, the repair and the signage is a kind of a different bucket than the shaving, that it could merit its own category. But I mean, I'm up to, if city staff thinks it's more flexible, that's easier for them, I'm open to that. But I do think that there are different projects that could merit its own bucket.
So that was a soft yes, I guess. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Freed, can you take a roll call vote?
Commissioner Del Rosario,
Yes.
Commissioner Graham,
Yes.
Commissioner Chavandel,
Aye.
Vice Chair Fong,
Aye.
and Chair McCroskey.
Aye.
So note we're at 9:35 now. Got two more items. Do you have Michelle Plaus here, who's available to present the third item? I don't know, Jeff, is there time sensitivity on the work plan that you are aware of in terms of the council planning at this point?
Not a hard deadline by any means. I think it's, you know, when we can get to it, we should. I think if it's a if the commission feels like the work plan is going to be a substantive discussion this evening, and you might want to start it fresh on earlier in a subsequent meeting. And, you know, we can make that, push that up higher in your May meeting and then get it to council in June. I think that would be just fine.
I guess I'm in favor of the latter proposal, pushing off the work plan and coming at it fresh, giving it strong attention. Is that acceptable to the other commissioners? I'm seeing general agreement. Great. So let's go on to item 5.3 and we'll defer item 5.4 for a future meeting.
I'd like to start this off just by introducing to the commission Michelle Plaus. Michelle has been working in our office for I think over a year now. She is an analyst and working primarily up to this point on sustainability and climate action related things, but she has an interest in transportation as well. So you'll start to see Michelle from time to time supporting some of the work that Justin is doing. And she's has recently had some experience looking at some legislation for the Climate Action Committee, and we thought it would be good for her to take on this agenda item as well. So I'll turn it over to Michelle for her presentation.
Thanks, Jeff. Let me just go ahead and share my screen for you all. Yes, it's nice to meet you all virtually. And as Jeff said, I have a few bills that are currently in the state legislature to tell you all about tonight. AB43, 550, and SB314. So I'm going to start with those first two, 43 and 550, because they're more related to each other and they're both really focused on speed. They both are inspired by Vision Zero, which is kind of a movement and a campaign that is attempting to reduce traffic deaths and severe injuries down to zero and prioritizing safety when it comes to transportation policy. And that movement and campaign is spreading around the world and inspired a zero traffic fatalities task force in the state legislature. They recently released a report, and that report focuses on a lot of things related to traffic safety, but especially on speed, because speed has such a significant impact on fatality when it comes to a vehicle pedestrian collision. As you can see in this chart here, just a small increase in speed has a really significant impact on the chance of survival. So these two bills, 43 and 550, are focusing on speed and are really coming out of the ideas and the recommendations from that task force report. So I'll start with 43. This one is really about giving local authorities flexibility in the way that they set speed limits, and in particular, the flexibility to lower speed limits where that would increase safety. So you can see here, there's a list. I won't go into all of these in detail since it's already quite late. But you can see that there's quite a few ways that it allows a city to lower speed limits, particularly in high injury areas or near vulnerable populations. It makes it easier to establish a school zone and also lower speed limits near business districts. It allows the city to round down instead of up to the nearest 5-mile increment. So there's just kind of a menu of options here. There's only one requirement for the city that would come into effect if this law were passed, and that's during an engineering and traffic survey, the city would need to consider the safety of bicyclists, pedestrians, and other vulnerable groups. So it's really just kind of adding a piece into that survey requirement. And then it also has some slight edits to the definition of a speed trap. For an engineering and traffic survey that's evaluated by a registered engineer, it extends the validity of that survey from 10 years to 14. So just kind of giving it a longer lifespan. And then it also exempts senior zones and business districts, again, making it easier to lower speed limits in those areas. So again, not a lot in requirements for the city, but just kind of giving more flexibility to focus on safety and lower speed limits. AB 550 is really about enforcement of those speed limits. And in particular, it's about automatic speed enforcement systems. So these systems are essentially radar for tracking the speed of vehicles. And when the radar detects a vehicle going at a given speed, it can trigger a camera to take a picture of the license plate and send that data back to a processing center, potentially law enforcement of some kind, where a human goes over the data, figures out if it was in fact a violation, goes through records to find the owner of the vehicle, and then sends a citation in the mail. So this kind of system is currently illegal in California, but it is in use all over the world and has been for over 20 years now. And it has proven effective in reducing speeding and fatalities. So this bill essentially is looking into beginning a program using ASE. Just to kind of briefly cover some of the debate around these systems.
Can I ask a brief question?
Yes, go ahead.
The camera systems, are those intended on high-speed, low-speed roadways, or mix of both? Or?
Yeah, they can be used on either high-speed or low-speed roadways. I'll get into the locations where it would be allowed on this bill in a minute, but it could be used in any of those. So yes, back to the kind of benefits and drawbacks of these systems. This is in the memo, so I won't go into a lot of detail here, but this is, a lively debate. The main benefit is that it allows speeding to be enforced without law enforcement, without law officers, and without having to pull cars over. Obviously, there's, just the manpower requirements of that. And then there's also situations where it might be dangerous to pull over a car. It causes congestion. And, there's just kind of physical limits to how many cars you can pull over. So this would help kind of make it possible to enforce in a wider way. Some of the limitations are that there's kind of a time lag between the violation and enforcement. No one's there to actually stop the driver from speeding in that moment. It might be weeks before they get a citation in the mail. They've forgotten what happened. And there's also challenges on legal grounds that have played out in the courts. There are questions about, privacy and equal protection and these kinds of issues. And there's still a debate in terms of where exactly the line needs to be drawn with those things. So for AB 550, it's really just creating pilot programs in specific cities. So it's not a particularly widespread thing, but it's just trying to kind of start the process of feeling this out in a way. So it allow pilot programs to take place in Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, and then in Los Angeles and 2 other Southern California cities, which are TBD. And all of those pilot programs would have to follow a set of guidelines that's laid forth in the bill. So starting with location, it would have to be in schools, senior zones, parks, or other high injury networks. So really these kind of sensitive high risk areas. And it couldn't cover more than 15% of the city's streets. So it'd be limited in scope in that way. There's also public information requirements. There'd have to be a campaign, and the first 30 days of enforcement would only be warnings instead of actual notices of violation. There would also be a real-time notification requirement to try to bridge that gap between violation and enforcement a little bit. So people would, there'd be a sign that would flash, essentially. There are also confidentiality rules, very strict rules about what the law enforcement entities can do with the data, how long they can store it. And there's also no facial recognition allowed or even photos of the driver. It would just be of the license plate in the rear of the vehicle. As far as the violations go, they'd be civil violations and wouldn't lead to a point on the driving record. And it also sets a limit that the car must be going at least 11 miles per hour over the speed limit in order for the camera to be triggered. So, you know, if you're at a 30-mile-an-hour zone, you wouldn't get a violation for 31. There's also a requirement that each street see actual progress. So there's, you know, some specific numbers about this, but essentially if we don't see a reduction in violations on a particular street, the program has to end on that street. And then there's also reporting requirements for safety, cost, equity, and civil rights. So a lot of requirements for all of these pilot programs. As far as the impact on Albany goes, this wouldn't be taking place in the city itself, but it could potentially impact residents that are driving through, you know, Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, even LA maybe, and are impacted by these programs. And then of course, down the line, it's possible that this would lead to a future statewide policy on automatic speed enforcement. All right, and our final bill of the night is SB 314. This one's a little bit different. It's about alcohol. As you guys might remember, last year, in response to the pandemic and the need for outdoor dining, the Department of Alcoholic Beverage Control created a COVID-19 temporary catering permit, which allowed restaurants and other businesses to serve alcohol in outdoor spaces adjacent to their business. And this allowed for more dining outdoors, and in particular in Albany and lots of other cities in kind of unusual places like parking spaces and sidewalks where we don't usually have dining going on. But this alcohol licensing rule was really essential to make that possible. And this bill, it's still kind of in the process of being made. It's gone through a lot of changes recently, but the overall intent is to extend the lifetime of this temporary permit so that the outdoor service can continue after the emergency orders are lifted, potentially about a year. And then it also is looking into potentially making a permanent license of this kind. The details are still foggy on that. And then there's also allowing multiple retailers to share a single space. So overall, the idea is to try to take some of these kind of instant reactions to the pandemic and make them more permanent policy for the long term. So the staff recommendation for these three is actually split apart. So number one is for the commission to recommend that the city council adopt resolutions in support of AB43 and AB550. Those are the two related to speeding. Staff doesn't have any recommendation for an action regarding SB 314 at this time. It's just sort of more informational, and maybe we'll come back down the line as it progresses. All right, I'm happy to take any of your questions.
Thank you for that presentation. I see we have a question from Commissioner Grant.
Are other commissions being asked to weigh in on the third of those two, the alcohol related?
Not yet,
but
I think that might happen down the line. It sort of depends on how the bill progresses, because as I said, you know, between writing the memo and editing it, the bill changed quite a bit. So I think down the line it's possible, but not as of right now.
Commissioner Fong?
Yeah, so just to follow up on that, so it sounds like when you say no recommendation, it's not that we don't want to, it's not that we don't want to weigh in on it. It's more like we're gonna weigh in on it at a later date when we have more information. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think I'll let Jeff or Justin pipe in if they have more of a thought on that, but I think so.
Yeah, we haven't had an opportunity to communicate with any of the businesses using the outdoor dining or understand if there is a benefit or impact. So we just wanted to give an update since we know interest in the discussion around pilot to permanent has come up here. It's been come up in the work plan discussion. We wanted to let you know that this was happening, but yeah, we haven't done enough groundwork to know the impacts here.
Commissioner Del Rosario.
Thanks, and thanks for the really clear presentation. That was good. So along the same lines of those conversations, so we haven't at the commission had many of these requests for supporting or opposing legislation. What is the process for this? And do we have a whole legislative tracking of different bills that the city supports and opposes? So I guess my question, maybe more specifically, is after it goes through this commission, then does it go to council and there's some sort of support letter or something that's given for the bill or testimony or something like that?
I can take a shot at that. Yes, you would be making a recommendation to the city council, and then the city council would usually, I think it's authorizing the mayor to write a letter in, excuse me, in support of or opposition in some cases of a particular piece of legislation. The council does this on a fairly regular basis. There's probably at least a half a dozen, maybe a dozen bills a year that they'll weigh in on. We don't have an organized legislative priority or a on-call lobbyist or anything like that some larger cities or agencies have. But we do try to stay on top of these things that we pick up from professional organizations or from members of the public, or particularly the League of California Cities often will ask cities to take positions on bills.
Got it. Okay. If I may, Chairman Kosky, this leads me to my next question is, I think I've been reading that these two have definitely been going side by side, but I think there's also been this Freedom to Walk Act, AB 1238, that's been grouped in with this also. And I don't know if that's something that is of interest for the city to weigh in on as well.
Yeah, I have heard of that. So I know that's been grouped as well. Justin, I think, had a thought on that third bill. Is that right, Justin?
Yeah, if it's not really part of this discussion, if you would like us to bring it before this body, I wasn't sure in terms of which body the council would want to weigh in on that one. So we didn't bring it here, but I have seen that some organizations, are supporting all three as a package.
Other commissioner questions? Seeing none and with an eye on the time, I'll ask if there's any public input.
I'm not seeing any raised hands.
All right, then let's bring it back to the commission. Comments? Opinions? Commissioner Del Rosario.
I definitely support both that are being requested for support, and I actually support all three. The one thing I want to point out with AB550 is that it removes the interaction between an officer and a driver, which can escalate into serious and unnecessary events. And so I think that's definitely a plus of this. But yeah, I'm supportive of both.
Other opinions? Commissioner Fong.
Yeah, I'm also supportive of the two that we're considering, and I'm also supportive of generally what I know of the third one as well. So I think that definitely is a good idea to add some more flexibility in terms of permits for businesses that have expanded outside. Overall supportive of all three bills.
Commissioner Jamadal.
Just comment that I think that City of Berkeley May 11th council meeting has these on their agenda as well for resolutions of support. In the case of Berkeley, we're going to be asking for AB 550 for Berkeley to be added to the list of eligible cities. At least, a mid-sized city in Northern California that could participate as well would provide, a good test bed, if you will, for that kind of program. And to some of the issues that were well described as potential concerns, one of the things I've always advocated for is to avoid the perception that it's a money-making proposition, that we provide plenty of fair warning up to and including speed feedback signs in advance of the radar speed enforcement camera. So you get a big flashing light message telling you you're about to get a citation if you don't slow down. At that point, we're undermining the potential revenue generation, but we're trying to change behavior. And I think we want to make it really clear it's about behavior change, not about making money. So I'm a strong supporter of both of these. I think that they really address some big challenges. And as was mentioned, it's, if you want to pursue Vision Zero, changing speed is critical. And taking unnecessary interactions between the public and law enforcement out of the equation, provides another path towards safety in a different mode. And I think that that's something that we need to move towards as well. So I'd be happy to move that we recommend that the City Council adopt a resolution of support for AB 43 and AB 550.
Do we have a second?
I seconded.
I would just like to add before we stop the discussion that I've experienced this kind of citation camera setup on the freeway between Washington, D.C. and one of the major airports. And I can report that taxi drivers drove in a sane and reasonable speed manner on that major freeway. So I've seen it work. And the second thing is that I am all for reducing interaction between police forces and the citizenry when unnecessary. And I have to say that in Albany, we just don't have a lot of traffic enforcement. So the potential for targeting locations with this technology is pretty attractive. Any last comments? Yes, Commissioner Grant.
Just one last comment. When I asked if other commissions were going to be asked about the alcoholic beverage one, it's because I also feel like it's a planning and zoning commission purview. So I guess I would just hope that they have a further discussion on it. And I support taking no action on it, but I think that I hope that they revisit it. Thank you.
I would love to see that one come back to us when it comes a little further along to give us an opportunity. And maybe the Idaho stop measure that's working its way through the legislature when it's appropriate, which might be a little more controversial. So any other comments? Justin, would you take roll on the measure, please?
Commissioner Del Rosario.
I'm sorry, the motion.
Commissioner Graham.
Aye.
Commissioner Javindel.
Aye.
Vice Chair Fong.
Aye.
Chair McCroskey.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Great. Okay. So we're skipping 5.4. Can I get a motion to go on for another 5-10 minutes? just to finish out the meeting.
Motion to extend till 10:10 p.m.
We beat you to it there, and that's so. I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Great. Let's continue on. So we're at item number 6, announcements from staff.
No announcements today.
Well, I just would like to just mention in passing, there will be a tentatively scheduled a budget work session on May 17th. That may change because there's still a lot of work that going into preparing for that. But among the things that we'll be looking at is our professional services budgets for some of the studies that I'm sure the commission would be interested in.
Great. I'd also like to announce that there will be a bike to work day this year on May 21st. So look for that.
What if you're working from home?
You're welcome to bike as you can, when you can. If you'd like to shift that bike to work day for you to some other day, feel free. If you'd like to take your lunch hour and bike around the block, whatever works for you.
Okay, great.
We all have to adapt, don't we? Great. Any other announcements? Future agenda items, we've already identified that we're going to start next time, I believe, with the work plan. So we have another chance to prepare for that. So bring your prep and let's hash through that. Staff?
Other than the work plan, other items in the works, unsure what will be coming next month exactly, but sidewalk survey data we're taking a look at. The survey, I believe, is complete and still waiting on the school district on Ocean View encroachment. Those conversations are continuing. And this time of year, we should be getting access to the next year collision data to review. I haven't looked yet, but that should be available, and I'll bring that to the commission at some point soon.
Great. Okay, our next meeting is May 27th at 7 p.m. on this same BAT channel. And I want to thank everybody, staff, commissioners, and the public for participating in the meeting, and we look forward to seeing you again. Good night.